The mahogany doors of the Beacon Hill mansion echo through the marble foyer as Henry Thompson steps inside, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the pristine floor. At 62, the tech mogul moves through his $8 million home like a ghost haunting his own life. The silence is deafening. No wife calling his name from the kitchen. No children's laughter bouncing off these decorated walls. Just emptiness wrapped in luxury. But tonight, something feels different. Henry pauses at the base of the grand staircase, his weathered hand gripping the banister. Through the shadows of the second-floor hallway, he catches a glimpse of movement. A figure in black, moving with quiet purpose toward the east wing of the house. His breath catches. It's Maeve, his housekeeper of 3 years, carrying something delicate in her hands. Strange, Henry murmurs, checking his Rolex. It's nearly midnight. Little did Henry know that this moment would shatter everything he thought he understood about his own home. Maeve Johnson moves through the hallway like she belongs to the darkness itself. At 45, the elegant African-American woman has worked for the Thompson family longer than most people stay at any job, but tonight, Henry realizes he's never really seen her at all. She approaches a door at the end of the hall, a door that's remained locked for over a decade, and kneels gracefully beside it. Fresh white lilies. She places them carefully on the Persian rug, arranging the stems with the tenderness of someone tending a grave. Her fingers linger on the petals, and Henry watches from the shadows as her lips move in what appears to be a silent prayer. "What the hell?" Henry whispers, pressing himself against the wall. But what happened next shocked everyone who would later hear the story. Maeve doesn't just leave the flowers and walk away. She sits beside that locked door for nearly 20 minutes, speaking in hushed tones to absolutely no one. Her voice carries the weight of deep grief, the kind that settles in your bones and never leaves. Henry strains to hear her words, but catches only fragments, "I'm sorry, and I won't forget," and something that sounds like "please forgive me." The millionaire's heart pounds as he watches this woman, someone he's barely spoken to beyond basic pleasantries about household management, pour her soul out to his locked door. The same door he hasn't opened since that terrible night 10 years ago. When Maeve finally stands, smoothing her black uniform, Henry ducks deeper into shadow. She walks past him without a glance, her footsteps fading toward the servants' quarters. But the flowers remain, white as fresh snow against the dark wood, carrying secrets Henry never knew existed in his own home. Sleep becomes impossible. Henry paces his master bedroom, staring out at the Boston skyline, but his mind keeps returning to that hallway. To Maeve's tears glinting in the moonlight. To the reverence in her voice as she spoke to that door like it might answer back. This decision would change everything, but Henry doesn't know that yet. The next morning arrives gray and drizzling, typical for October in Boston. Henry positions himself in his study with a clear view of the main staircase, pretending to review quarterly reports while watching for Maeve. She appears at exactly 7 a.m., as punctual as always, carrying her cleaning supplies and wearing that same serene expression she's maintained for 3 years. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she says politely, her voice carrying the faint traces of a southern accent. "Will you be wanting breakfast in the dining room today?" Henry studies her face, searching for any sign of the woman he witnessed last night. But Maeve's dark eyes reveal nothing, her professional mask firmly in place. "Actually, Maeve," Henry says, setting down his papers, "I was wondering about something. Last night, I thought I heard movement upstairs quite late." For just a moment, barely a heartbeat, something flickers across Maeve's features. Fear? Guilt? But it's gone so quickly Henry almost thinks he imagined it. "I'm sorry if I disturbed you, sir," she replies smoothly. "I sometimes find it difficult to sleep, and I thought I'd do some light dusting. Old habits from when I worked nights at the hospital." The lie slides off her tongue like silk, but Henry catches it. Maeve has never mentioned working at a hospital. In fact, he realizes with sudden shame, he knows almost nothing about the woman who's maintained his home for 3 years. But the real shock was still coming. That evening, Henry makes a decision that will unravel everything. He positions himself in the library adjacent to the main hallway, lights dimmed, waiting. The grandfather clock in the foyer chimes 11, then 11:30. His eyelids grow heavy, and he's almost convinced he imagined the entire scene when he hears it, the soft whisper of footsteps on carpet. Maeve appears like clockwork, carrying more flowers. White lilies again, but this time Henry notices something else, tears streaming down her face. This isn't just a ritual, it's a pilgrimage of grief so profound it takes his breath away. She kneels beside that door, and this time Henry hears her words clearly. "I brought your favorites again. The white ones, like you always loved. I know you can't smell them anymore, but I remember how they made you smile." Henry's blood runs cold. Someone used to live behind that door. Someone who loved white lilies. Someone Maeve remembers with the kind of devotion that survives death itself. But who? And why has this woman been mourning them in secret, in his house, for God knows how long? Henry's hands shake as the realization hits him like a thunderbolt. Maeve isn't just his housekeeper. She's the guardian of a memory he's tried desperately to forget, and tomorrow night, he's going to find out exactly what secret she's been keeping in the darkness of his own home. The security footage flickered to life on Henry's office monitors, casting eerie blue shadows across his weathered face. He'd never felt the need to watch his staff before, trust had always been implicit in the Thompson household. But tonight, something compelled him to understand the mystery that had been unfolding under his own roof. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m. Henry leaned forward, his coffee growing cold as he watched the empty hallway stretch across multiple camera angles. Minutes passed in silence until a familiar figure appeared at the edge of frame 3. Maeve moved through the corridors like a ghost, her steps deliberate yet reverent. In her hands, she carried a small bouquet of white lilies, the same flowers Henry had been finding outside that locked door for weeks. The camera captured her pausing before the room, her shoulders rising and falling with what appeared to be a deep, steadying breath. "What are you doing, Maeve?" Henry whispered to the screen, his fingers gripping the armrest of his leather chair. On the monitor, Maeve knelt beside the door, arranging the flowers with the same careful precision a mourner might use at a graveside. But it was what happened next that made Henry's breath catch in his throat. Maeve pressed her palm against the wooden door and whispered something, words the cameras couldn't capture but emotions they clearly conveyed. Her entire body seemed to tremble with an invisible weight. The footage revealed this wasn't a recent development. Henry scrolled through weeks of recordings, finding the same ritual repeated night after night. Maeve's dedication was unwavering, her grief, for Henry was certain now that grief was what he was witnessing, as fresh as if the wound had been torn open yesterday. But whose grief was it? And why did it center on a room in his house that had remained locked for over a decade? Henry's investigation led him deeper into Maeve's background than he'd ever ventured before. Through old employment records, he discovered she'd worked for several prominent Boston families, always with glowing recommendations. But there were gaps, periods where she'd disappeared from the employment rolls entirely, only to resurface months later in a different household. The pattern was troubling. Or perhaps, Henry reflected, it was simply human. As he dug deeper, a particular detail caught his attention. Maeve had previously worked at a house on Commonwealth Avenue, the same street where Henry had lived as a child, before his family had moved to the Beacon Hill mansion. The timeline aligned perfectly with a period Henry preferred not to remember, those final months before everything in his life had changed forever. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. Could Maeve's connection to his family run deeper than simple employment? Could she know about the tragedy that had shaped his entire adult life, the reason that room had remained sealed all these years? Henry found himself studying Maeve with new intensity over the following days. During their brief interactions, he noticed details he'd previously overlooked. The way she touched the banister on the main staircase, as if greeting an old friend. How she paused before certain family photographs in the hallway, her expression unreadable but undeniably emotional. Most telling of all was how she seemed to know exactly which rooms held memories too painful for Henry to confront. "Maeve," Henry called out as she finished dusting the living room one afternoon. The late autumn sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the silver in her hair. "How long have you known this house?" She looked up from her work, and for a moment, Henry saw something flicker across her features, recognition, perhaps, or fear. "I've been working here for 3 years, Mr. Thompson. You know that." "That's not what I meant." Henry stepped closer, his voice gentle but persistent. "You move through these halls like someone who's walked them before. Like someone who knows their secrets." Maeve's hands stilled on the feather duster. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Every house has secrets, Mr. Thompson. Some are just heavier than others." The weight of her words settled between them like a challenge. Henry realized he was standing at a crossroads. He could retreat into the comfortable isolation that had protected him for so long, or he could push forward into territory that might shatter the careful walls he'd built around his heart. But as he watched Maeve carefully pack away her cleaning supplies, her movements betraying a familiarity with the house that went beyond her years of employment, Henry knew he'd already made his choice. Tonight, he would confront her about the flowers, about the room, about whatever connection bound her to his family's past. He just wasn't prepared for how that conversation would change everything he thought he knew about love, loss, and the unexpected ways people enter our lives to heal wounds we didn't even know were still bleeding. The confrontation comes sooner than Henry expected. He finds himself standing in the kitchen doorway at 11:30 that night, watching Maeve arrange fresh white lilies with the same reverent care he'd observed on the security footage. The soft overhead light casts gentle shadows across her weathered hands as she trims each stem to the perfect length. "Maeve." His voice cuts through the silence like a blade. She freezes, her fingers still wrapped around the flower stems. For a moment, neither of them moves. Then she slowly turns to face him, her dark eyes reflecting a mixture of resignation and something else, fear, perhaps, or grief so deep it's become part of her very being. "Mr. Thompson." Her voice is barely above a whisper. "I didn't hear you come down." Henry steps into the kitchen, his bare feet silent on the cold marble floor. He's traded his usual expensive suits for simple pajamas and a robe, and somehow this makes him seem more human, more vulnerable. "We need to talk about the flowers. About that room." Maid's shoulders sag as if she's been carrying an invisible weight for years, and it's finally becoming too heavy to bear. She sets the lilies down on the counter with infinite care, treating them like precious artifacts. "I suppose we do," she says, her southern accent more pronounced now that her composure is cracking. "How long have you been doing this?" Henry asks, moving closer but keeping the kitchen island between them. "The flowers, the ritual, how long?" "Every night for 3 years," she admits, her hands finding the edge of the counter for support. "Ever since I started working here." "But why? What's in that room that's so important to you?" Maeve's eyes fill with tears that she refuses to let fall. She reaches into the pocket of her uniform and pulls out something small and golden, a heart-shaped locket that catches the light as it dangles from a delicate chain. "This belonged to my daughter, Sarah," she says, holding the locket like it's made of the most fragile glass. "She would have been 25 this year." Henry feels his chest tighten. The way Maeve speaks about her daughter, the past tense hanging heavy in the air, tells him everything he needs to know without her having to explain further. "Maeve, I'm sorry. She died in a car accident 4 years ago," Maeve continues, her voice steady despite the tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "Right here in Boston. She was coming to visit me, to see the house where I worked. She'd heard so much about this place, about the beautiful rooms and the history." She opens the locket with trembling fingers, revealing a tiny photograph of a young woman with Maeve's gentle eyes and brilliant smile. But what makes Henry's breath catch isn't the photo, it's the background visible behind the girl's face. It's unmistakably the gardens of his estate, taken from the very window of the locked room upstairs. "She was fascinated by that room," Maeve whispers. "When I showed her pictures, she said it looked like a place where love lived. Where memories were kept safe." Henry's mind races, trying to understand the connection, but there's something Maeve isn't telling him. Something that explains why she's been leaving flowers at his family's door every single night for 3 years. "There's more, isn't there?" he asks, his voice gentler now. Maeve nods, clutching the locket against her chest. Sarah wasn't just coming to visit me that night, Mr. Thompson. She was coming to tell me something important. Something about her father. The kitchen falls silent except for the steady tick of the antique clock on the wall. Henry feels the ground shifting beneath his feet, sensing that whatever Maeve is about to reveal will change everything he thought he knew about his own life. What about her father, he asks, though part of him already dreads the answer. Maeve meets his eyes directly for the first time since the conversation began. She'd been doing research, tracing her family history. She discovered something that I'd kept from her for 25 years. Henry's heart pounds so loudly he's sure Maeve can hear it. The locket, the flowers, the locked room, pieces of a puzzle he didn't even know existed are beginning to form a picture that terrifies him. But before Maeve can speak another word, Henry makes a decision that will change both their lives forever. I'm opening that room tonight, he says, his voice filled with a determination that surprises them both. Whatever secrets it holds, whatever you've been protecting or honoring, I need to know. The brass key felt heavier than it should have in Henry's trembling hand as he stood before the mahogany door he hadn't opened in 7 years. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly behind him, shadows dancing in the amber glow of the crystal chandelier. His heart hammered against his ribs as he inserted the key, the metallic click echoing through the silence like a gunshot. The door swung open with a soft creak, and Henry's breath caught in his throat. The room was a shrine. Photographs lined every surface, his late wife Margaret laughing at their wedding, his daughter Emma blowing out candles on her 8th birthday, family vacations to Martha's Vineyard. Fresh white lilies, Margaret's favorite flowers, sat in crystal vases throughout the room. The furniture remained exactly as Margaret had left it, her reading chair positioned by the window where she'd spent countless afternoons with Emma curled in her lap. "Oh God," Henry whispered, his voice breaking as he stepped into the room that held his entire world. On the antique writing desk sat Margaret's jewelry box, polished to perfection. Her perfume bottles gleamed in the afternoon light streaming through freshly cleaned windows. Every surface had been lovingly maintained, every photograph carefully dusted. But what made Henry's knees buckle was the small framed picture on the nightstand, one he'd never seen before. Margaret and Emma at the hospital, just days before the accident that took them both. Behind him, footsteps approached slowly. "Mr. Thompson?" Henry spun around, tears streaming down his face. Maeve stood in the doorway, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, eyes filled with a mixture of fear and sorrow. "You did this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All this time, you've been taking care of them," Maeve finished softly. "Yes, sir. I have been." Henry's legs gave out, and he sank into Margaret's reading chair, the same chair where he proposed to her 15 years ago. "But how did you, why would you?" Maeve stepped carefully into the room, her movements reverent, as if she were entering a church. "Mr. Thompson, there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said long ago." She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small, worn photograph. "I knew your family before I worked for you." The photograph showed a younger Maeve in a nurse's uniform, standing beside Margaret's hospital bed. Emma was in the picture too, grinning widely despite the four in her small arm. "You were Emma's nurse," Henry breathed, the pieces finally clicking into place. "At Boston Children's Hospital. During her leukemia treatments." "For 3 years," Maeve nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "That little girl was the brightest light I'd ever known. And your wife, she treated me like family. When Emma went into remission, when you all went on that celebration trip to the mountains." Her voice broke. "I never got to say goodbye. The car accident that killed his wife and daughter had happened so suddenly, so unexpectedly. One moment they were celebrating Emma's clean bill of health, the next moment Henry's world had shattered completely. After the funeral, I couldn't stop thinking about them," Maeve continued. "About how much joy they brought to everyone around them. When I heard through the hospital that you were looking for a housekeeper, I knew I had to apply. I thought maybe I could help you heal, the way your family helped me through my own dark times." "Your own dark times?" Henry's voice was hoarse. Maeve's hand went to the locket around her neck. I lost my own daughter to the same disease Emma beat. She was 6. That's when I became a pediatric nurse. I wanted to help other children fight what my baby couldn't. She paused, wiping her eyes. Your Emma gave me hope again. She showed me that sometimes miracles do happen, that love can conquer even the darkest circumstances. When I lost her too, in that accident, I felt like I'd failed them both. Henry stared at this woman who had been silently grieving alongside him for 7 years, who had lovingly maintained this shrine to his family while he'd sealed himself away from their memory. The weight of his own selfishness crushed down on him. So you've been coming here every night, he said slowly, keeping their memory alive while I've been running from it. They deserve to be remembered, Maeve said firmly. They deserve to have their love live on, even if you weren't ready to face it. But as Henry looked around the room, at the evidence of Maeve's devotion, a terrible realization began to dawn on him. There was something else here, something that would change everything he thought he knew about the accident that destroyed his life. Henry stands in the doorway of the room, tears still streaming down his face as the weight of discovery settles in his chest. Maeve remains beside him, her weathered hands clutching the edge of her apron, both of them surrounded by 20 years of carefully preserved memories. The afternoon sunlight filtering through the curtains illuminates dust motes dancing in the air, making the space feel almost sacred. I thought you'd be angry, Maeve whispers, her voice barely audible. I thought when you found out, you'd send me away. Henry turns to face her, really seeing her for the first time. The woman who has walked these halls for 2 decades, who has carried the burden of his family's memory while he buried himself in work in isolation. Angry, he repeats, shaking his head slowly. Maeve, you've been honoring them when I couldn't even say their names. She looks up at him with tears in her deep brown eyes. Your mama, she hired me right before the accident. Sweet little Emma, she was only 7, and your daddy was teaching her to ride that bicycle in the garden. Mrs. Thompson showed me their rooms, told me how they liked their morning tea, how Emma insisted on having her stuffed elephant tucked in just right. Maeve's voice breaks. When they died, I didn't know what to do with all that love I had ready to give them. Henry's throat constricts as he listens. For 20 years, he's avoided this house during family anniversaries, spent holidays in hotels, anything to escape the memories. Yet Maeve has been here, tending to them with a devotion he couldn't muster. The flowers, he manages to say. Emma's favorites, Maeve nods, touching one of the wilted daisies on the dresser. She picked them in the garden that last morning. Made a crown for her mama's hair. She moves to the windowsill where a small collection of Emma's drawings are displayed. I found these in her room after you locked it all away. She drew this family, see? All of you holding hands in front of this house. She wrote Forever Family at the bottom. Henry's knees nearly buckle as he sees the crayon drawing. His 7-year-old daughter's vision of their eternal bond, preserved by a woman who barely knew them but understood their worth better than he did. I couldn't bear it, he admits. Looking at their things, remembering how happy we were. It felt like betraying them to move on, but staying felt impossible too. Maeve reaches out tentatively, placing her hand on his arm. Grief ain't about forgetting, Mr. Thompson. It's about carrying love forward. Your family, they wouldn't want you living like a ghost in your own house. The dam finally breaks completely. Henry collapses into the chair beside Emma's bed, sobbing with a rawness he hasn't allowed himself in decades. Maeve sits beside him, not speaking, just present in the way she's been present for his family's memory all these years. When his tears slow, Henry looks around the room with new eyes. You've kept them alive, he says wonderfully. All these years, I thought I was protecting myself from pain, but you've been protecting them from being forgotten. They deserved better than locked doors, Maeve says simply. Love deserves better than locked doors. Henry stands slowly, walking to the window that overlooks the garden where Emma learned to ride her bike. The space has been maintained immaculately, Maeve's work, no doubt. What would you think, he says carefully, about opening this house back up? Really living in it again? Maeve's eyes widen. You mean? I mean turning this into a home again. Not a mausoleum. Henry touches the photograph on the nightstand, showing his wife's radiant smile. They lived here. They loved here. Maybe it's time I honor that by doing the same. He turns to Maeve, seeing her not as employee but as the guardian angel she's been. Would you help me? Not as my maid, but as family? The word hangs in the air between them, revolutionary in its simplicity. Maeve has been caring for his family longer than many blood relatives remain constant in people's lives. I'd be honored, she whispers, tears flowing freely now. Together, they begin opening curtains throughout the room, letting light flood spaces that have been shrouded in darkness for too long. Henry picks up one of Emma's stuffed animals, holding it close instead of flinching away. The grief is still there, but it feels different now, warmer, more like love than loss. Every night, I'll still bring fresh flowers, Maeve says, arranging a new bouquet on the dresser. But maybe now we can have some throughout the house too. Fill it with life again. Henry nods, understanding finally that healing doesn't require forgetting. It requires remembering with love instead of pain, carrying forward instead of staying frozen. As evening approaches, he doesn't retreat to his isolated breakfast room. Instead, he and Maeve prepare dinner together in the kitchen, sharing stories about his family that bring laughter instead of only tears. The house feels different now, not emptied by loss, but enriched by memory and renewed purpose. Sometimes the greatest gifts come from the most unexpected places, delivered by hands we barely notice until they reveal the depth of their devotion. In choosing to honor the dead, Maeve taught Henry how to live again. What stories of unexpected kindness have touched your life? Share in the comments below, because sometimes the most profound healing happens when we recognize the angels who've been walking among us all along.